Distinguished guests, please welcome the leaders of the countries that have signed onto the Joint Declaration on Ukrainian Recovery and Reconstruction. Please welcome the President of the United States, accompanied by the President of Ukraine, the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the President of the European Commission. Your Excellencies, please take your seats. The speaking program will begin momentarily. Distinguished guests, please welcome the President of the United States.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome to Washington. Fellow leaders, friends, for 944 days, Putin has waged his vicious onslaught against Ukraine. For 944 days, Ukrainian people have stood unwavering, unbroken, and unbowed. Today we're launching the Joint Declaration of Support for Ukraine, Recovery and Reconstruction to make it clear we stand with Ukraine, now and in the future. That starts on the battlefield. I'm determined to ensure that Ukraine has what it needs to prevail in its fight for its survival. Tomorrow, I will announce a series of actions to accelerate support for Ukraine's military. But we know Ukraine's future victory is about more than what happens on the battlefield. It's also about what Ukrainians do to make the most of a free and independent future, of which so many have sacrificed so much. With this declaration, over 30 countries and the European Union have made important commitments. First, as Ukraine continues to make necessary reforms to fight corruption, we're committed to providing Ukraine with the resources it needs to build back stronger than it was before. Folks, it's no secret. Russian attacks have caused significant damage to Ukraine. And less well known is the story of Ukraine's economic resilience. Ukraine's GDP is stable and actually growing. Ukraine's defense industry, forged in the fire, is 6 times larger than it was a year ago. And Ukraine is now exporting almost as much grain as it did before the war, feeding people and the world once again. Ukraine's economy is resilient, and together we can help Ukraine go from economic resilience to economic revival. Second, we commit to hold Russia accountable for the damage it has caused. This builds on a historic effort by the G7. Back in 2022, 2 days after Russia's invasion, members of the G7 and the EU worked together to freeze $280 billion in Russian central bank funds outside of Russia. This summer, at the G7, the United States and our partners reached a decision to unlock $50 billion from the proceeds of those frozen assets to put that money to work for Ukraine as it rebuilds and recovers its economy. Today, we reaffirm that with all our respective countries and legal systems, Russia's sovereign assets will be immobilized until Russia ends its aggression and pays for the damage it's caused. Finally, we're committed to coordinate closely through efforts like the Ukraine Donor Platform so we can make sure that each dollar goes as far as possible, reinforcing one another instead of duplicating work. Let me close with this. This war has shown the Ukrainians can do anything they set their minds to. Today, we show the Ukrainians you're not alone. You're not alone in this fight. You're not alone in the reconstruction that comes after. Ukrainian people have fought and died to win a future of freedom and independence. Mr. President, we all stand by your side to help Ukraine make the most of it. Thank you all very much.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the President of Ukraine.
Thank you so much, dear President Biden, dear leaders, dear our friends. I'm grateful to all of you for your unity in protecting lives. We previously gathered at the NATO summit in Vilnius to strengthen our defense cooperation. We do value the G7 Security Declaration and the 26 bilateral security agreements, which fortify us all. And now more than 30 countries and the EU have agreed to the declaration, truly strong declaration focused on rebuilding Ukraine after the hostilities. This is a shared commitment to help rebuild Ukraine and support our path to the EU. It involves coordinating recovery efforts through the Ukrainian Donor Platform, ensuring that our joint ideas become a reality. And it's crucial that this support becomes tangible this year. That's why additional financing resources are planned by the end of the year, with access to 50 billion in immobilized assets from the aggressor state, Russia, which brought this war upon us. This reflects our shared vision of life. We protect people, and we ensure that people have the opportunities to live. And it is absolutely justified that those who help us withstand now will be the first to benefit together with Ukraine from the large-scale reconstruction. Security and prosperity are tightly intertwined, and one cannot exist without the other. Sadly, throughout history, wars have too often shattered the destinies of generations, lasting a few years but poisoning lives for decades. Together we can prevent this now. We must not leave behind ruins that would spread resentment and bitterness after this war. This task can only be achieved and can only be achieved together. After the devastating Second World War, the Allies launched the Marshall Plan, which gave peace the strength to become truly lasting. And today we are laying the foundation for a similar architecture of recovery, one that will promote peace for Ukraine and all of Europe and the general welfare. I thank President Biden and all you, France and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni for their supporting in organizing today's meeting and for their unwavering leadership in protecting our lives. Thank you all, my friends, and I am confident life will prevail. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the President of the European Commission.
President Biden, President Zelenskyy, fellow leaders. In a few weeks, the world will mark 1,000 days of Russia's full-scale invasion. So many innocent people have been killed. So many cities have been razed to the ground. So many families have been torn apart. One day we will know how many young men and women were killed in this imperialistic war. But there's something we already know today. Peace cannot be taken for granted. We have to stand up for it every single day. No one wants peace more than the people of Ukraine. A just and lasting peace. Peace is not only the end of fighting. Peace is not simply the absence of war. Peace is a settlement that makes war impossible and unnecessary. We must put Ukraine in the strong condition of negotiating such peace. And this is why the integration of Ukraine in the European Union is for us at the heart of our peace efforts. Putting Ukraine in a strong position is also about the economy. The G7 partners in Puglia announced the $50 billion loan to Ukraine, and I'm pleased to confirm that Europe will be providing up to 35 billion euros. This loan will be repaid by the windfall profits of the immobilized Russian assets. In other words, it is Russia who pays for the damages it caused. And Volodymyr, today you described how Russia tries to plunge Ukraine in the dark by massively targeting your energy infrastructure. Rest assured, together with our partners, we are repairing, reconnecting, and stabilizing the energy supplies. There is light for Ukraine. And allow me to share a last thought with you. We can never match the sacrifices the Ukrainian people are making every day to stay free and independent. But what we can do, stand by their side and build a common future. 5 days ago, I was in Kyiv and saw several startups, and it was really touching. Despite the war, Ukraine is blessed by the daring entrepreneurial spirit of its young people. Ukraine is becoming one of Europe's most digitized economies. Macroeconomic conditions are stable. Inflation is under control. But most importantly, Ukraine is actively reaching out to the world with its peace formula. And this is what the brave people of Ukraine deserve: a just and lasting peace. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, President Biden and President Zelenskyy. It is important that we meet here today as the world comes together for the General Assembly, because this group is united in its determination to stand up for the UN Charter in Ukraine. Russia's invasion is against everything the UN stands for, so it must be met with strength. International law must be upheld. None of us want this war, and no one wants to put it an end more than Ukraine. But so long as Putin continues this aggression, we will support Ukraine to defend its land and its people. That is why the UK has committed to provide £3 billion in military aid every year for as long as it is needed. And it's why we're investing in Ukraine's defence industry. We must redouble our efforts to help Ukraine push back and show Putin he cannot win this illegal war. At the Swiss Peace Summit this year, 89 countries came together to say that Ukraine's right to territorial integrity must be the basis of any sustainable peace settlement, and that has to be our starting point. And our commitment goes far beyond military aid. We're providing help for communities on the front line, help for energy infrastructure, recovery and reconstruction. Everything from solar panels on hospital rooftops to generators in Kharkiv and Odessa. We will deploy over £480 million of loan agreements for the World Bank lending before the end of the year to support the economy and vital public services, keeping schools and hospitals open. We're working also with the G7 to deliver that additional $50 billion from the profits generated by frozen Russian assets, because Russia must pay for Ukraine's recovery. Like everyone here today, I want to see Ukraine thrive as a strong, modern, prosperous European nation. And so I say again, we're in this for the long haul. Thank you all. Slava Ukraini.
Distinguished guests, this concludes the in-person speaking. The virtual program will begin shortly. Distinguished guests, please welcome the Prime Minister of the Italian Republic.
Dear Volodymyr, Good evening, dear Volodymyr, dear Joe, dear colleagues. For 943 days, the Ukrainian people has been reminding us of what it means to believe in and fight for their own freedom. And our cohesiveness has secured Ukraine the support it needed. This is a value to be protected if we want to restore peace in the heart of Europe. We have all done our own part, both at bilateral and multilateral level, and it is now necessary to increasingly systemize our efforts. The joint declaration adopted today, promoted by Italy as G7 presidency and joined by many, pushes this very direction. We as Italy signed the security agreement and adopted up to the 9th package of military aid. We have focused on air defense and are now going to deliver the second SAM-T battery. This is net of the support Italy continues to provide across the board, including the protection of infrastructures, not least our contribution to restoring energy production capacity following the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam. And as G7 presidency, we will continue to work to implement the agreement on the use of interests from frozen Russian assets in Europe as a collateral for a 50 billion loan. Looking to the future of Ukraine also means thinking about reconstruction, which must be supported jointly with international financial institutions and the private sector. We intend to do our part, hosting the Ukraine Recovery Conference in 2025. So, dear Volodymyr, we will continue to be by your side for as long as it is necessary. Our objective lies in putting an end to this war and helping Ukraine along its path towards a future of peace, freedom, and prosperity. So, as always, you can count on us. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Prime Minister of Canada.
Hello, my friends. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you, but I needed to be back in Parliament here in Ottawa. Volodymyr, very happy to join with you virtually and all our other G7 partners. Thank you, Joe, for hosting this. Good to see everyone here. Canadian support for Ukraine is unwavering, as is the support of the G7. I'm proud to endorse the joint declaration of support for recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. I want to make 4 brief points today. 1, we support your continued diplomatic efforts towards a just and lasting peace, including through the peace formula. I was honored to attend the Summit of Peace in Ukraine and Switzerland last June, where I committed to Canada hosting a foreign ministers meeting on the human dimension. Well, I'm pleased to announce that we will host this meeting here in Canada on October 30th and 31st, which we will co-chair with both Ukraine and Norway. And I certainly hope that all of you will be sending your foreign ministers to join with us in this important meeting where we can contribute to the return of deported children, detained civilians, and prisoners of war. Second, on security and military assistance, Canada is determined to continue to work with Ukraine and partners to provide you with all the support you need to achieve victory against Russian aggression. We're providing Ukraine with $500 million in new military assistance that I announced at the NATO summit in July, and we're considering more areas of critical and urgently needed support such as drones, artillery, armored vehicles, and fighter pilot training. We will continue continue to be there with you as long as it takes. On financing, the G7 under Georgia's leadership came together with a pledge in Apulia to make $50 billion in funding available to Ukraine through the extraordinary revenue acceleration loans, and we're putting those political commitments into action. As I announced in June, Canada stands ready to contribute up to $5 billion towards this initiative, and we'll continue to work with our G7 counterparts to put the mechanism for this funding in place by the end of the year. And finally, on recovery and reconstruction, we will continue to support Ukraine's vision for its recovery and reconstruction. We'll continue to support an inclusive recovery approach that ensures the voices of women, marginalized groups, and civil society are at the heart of Ukraine's path forward. Given the scale of investment required, leveraging public and donor funding will also be necessary to mobilize significant private investment and maximize available financing. As Canada takes on from the tremendous leadership that Georgia showed at the G7 this year, we take on the G7 presidency next year, and we will continue to make sure we are all delivering on our commitments to support Ukraine in its long-term self-defense, resilience, and reconstruction needs. We will stand with you with everything it takes until you win this war. Slava Ukraini.
Distinguished guests, this concludes the virtual speaking program. Thank you for joining us.
porque la actual crisis de confianza requiere el liderazgo responsable de los miembros presentes y futuros del Consejo en todos los ámbitos, incluyendo el cumplimiento de la agenda multilateral que todos los países aprobamos. Agenda 2030, el Acuerdo de París, la Declaración de los Derechos Humanos, por mencionar alguno de esos ejemplos. Acabamos de aprobar un pacto muy importante, esperanzador, que es el Pacto del Futuro, con un compromiso de reforzar entre todos el multilateralismo para las generaciones venideras. Honremos ese compromiso con un Consejo de Seguridad coherente, reformado y responsable. Gracias.
His Excellency Mr. Sanchez Perez Castellón for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Luís Montenegro, Prime Minister of the Portuguese Republic.
Senhora Presidente, muito obrigado e os meus cumprimentos a todos. Quero, em primeiro lugar, felicitar a Eslovénia pela promoção desta reflexão muito oportuna sobre a liderança para a paz sob a forma de debate aberto. De acordo com vários relatórios e indicadores, os últimos 3 anos foram os mais violentos das últimas 3 décadas. Num momento de forte crescimento de tensões geopolíticas e de conflitos, o trabalho do Conselho de Segurança é mais necessário do que nunca. É para ele que o mundo se vira para fazer face às ameaças à paz e à segurança internacionais, antes mesmo que estas se transformem em conflitos e em violência. Porém, este Conselho encontra-se frequentemente paralisado, em face de graves violações do direito internacional, ataques contra civis e tragédias humanitárias de enormes proporções. O cenário mais evidente deste impasse é o aumento do uso indiscriminado do direito de veto. A Carta prevê, no artigo 27, uma abordagem de boa-fé, em que as partes em litígio deverão abster-se de votar. Mas, ao longo dos anos, temos vindo a assistir a um aumento do uso do veto, bem como a situações em que membros do Conselho se tornam parte de um conflito, sendo simultaneamente juiz e jurado. Este é um claro sinal de bloqueio atual do Conselho e da sua dificuldade em garantir a estabilidade e a paz em nome de todos os povos das Nações Unidas. Enquanto a guerra prossegue, com consequências terríveis dentro e fora da Ucrânia, o Conselho de Segurança tem estado muitas vezes em silêncio. Em relação a Gaza, pouco diz e sempre demasiado tarde. Esperemos que agora, na situação do Líbano, o Conselho de Segurança possa ser ativo e consequente nos esforços de contenção que evitem uma escalada de violência. Mesmo quando resoluções são aprovadas, frequentemente ficam por cumprir. É imprescindível que, de Gaza ao Sudão, todas as partes façam o que estiver ao seu alcance para assegurar a plena implementação das resoluções adotadas por este Conselho. Senhora Presidente, é prioritário que o Conselho de Segurança tenha uma agenda orientada para soluções. Não é uma tarefa fácil, mas é urgente e é essencial restaurar a confiança e a esperança no multilateralismo. É essa a visão do Secretário-Geral e que foi agora assumida na nova Agenda para a Paz e na recente Cimeira do Futuro. Creio que o caminho passa por 4 aspectos fundamentais. Em primeiro lugar, uma abordagem preventiva. Prevenção significa agir. Agir antes da escalada de tensão. O Conselho deve fazer uso de todos os instrumentos da sua caixa de ferramentas, como é o caso da mediação e do apoio dos seus órgãos subsidiários, caso da Comissão para a Consolidação da Paz. Uma arquitetura operacional de paz abrangente e inclusiva, que engloba a prevenção, a manutenção e a consolidação da paz, com mandatos realistas, com objetivos e calendários claros, poderá adaptar-se melhor às diferentes fases daquilo que são os caminhos de paz. Em segundo lugar, o trabalho para as organizações regionais. Neste espírito, apoiamos a implementação da Resolução 2719 sobre o financiamento das operações de apoio à paz lideradas pela União Africana. Trabalhar com organizações regionais cumpre o espírito da Carta, complementando e reforçando o trabalho do Conselho por via de soluções mais próximas das pessoas afetadas. Em terceiro lugar, a questão mais ampla dos métodos de trabalho do Conselho de Segurança, incluindo apelos à restrição do uso do veto. o amplo apoio à Declaração Política Franco-Mexicana e ao Código de Conduta do ACT, Accountability, Coherence and Transparency, bem como a implementação da iniciativa do veto, evidenciam um consenso crescente sobre a necessidade de restringir o uso do veto no estrito respeito pela Carta. O direito de veto, à semelhança da assunção de um lugar à mesa do Conselho de Segurança, antes de constituir um privilégio, representa uma responsabilidade e é assim que deve ser exercido. É também necessário reforçar a responsabilização deste órgão perante a Assembleia Geral e a comunidade internacional. Por último, mas não menos importante, os 10 membros eleitos deste Conselho têm um papel crucial a desempenhar. Trabalhando em conjunto, podem constituir uma alternativa e apontar um caminho de soluções. Os membros eleitos revestem-se de uma legitimidade interregional que permite ultrapassar confrontos entre poderes instituídos. É nisto que acreditamos. Portugal continuará a trabalhar para restaurar a credibilidade, a relevância e a eficácia deste Conselho numa altura em que o seu papel é mais necessário do que nunca, sempre com a Carta das Nações Unidas como bússola orientadora. É neste espírito que Portugal é candidato a um mandato neste Conselho para o biênio 2027-2028. Muito obrigado a todos pela vossa atenção e muito obrigado, Sra. Presidente.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Montenegro for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency General J.J. Odongo Abubakar, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Uganda.
Madam President, I am honored to speak on behalf of the 121 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement. I wish to congratulate the Republic of Slovenia on its accession to the Presidency of the Security Council for the month of September and express appreciation for granting NAM the opportunity to present its position on today's topic. Madam President, the concept of leadership for peace is at the center of the Non-Aligned Movement. NAM member countries are committed to supporting, preserving, and strengthening the values of peace, multilateralism, and international cooperation as cornerstones of the Charter of the United Nations. We reaffirm our commitment to the United Nations as the primary multilateral institution with mechanisms to promote and support the intertwined values of humanity, namely peace, security, development, inalienable human rights, and mechanisms for the achievement of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. At the 19th summit held in Kampala in January this year, the heads of state and government reaffirmed the validity of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the principles and norms of international law as indispensable in preserving and promoting peace and security, the rule of law, economic development, and social progress, and all human rights for all. NAM is cognizant of the importance of building representative, democratic, and inclusive global institutions that serve the interests of all. In this respect, the movement stresses the need to strengthen multilateralism through a comprehensive reform of the current global governance architecture, including the United Nations system, the international financial institutions, and the multilateral development banks. The movement reaffirms its opposition to all unilateral coercive measures, including those measures used as tools for political or economic and financial pressure against any country, in particular against developing countries, which violates the Charter of the United Nations, the rules and principles of international law. We reaffirm that under no circumstances should people be deprived of their own means of sustenance and development. We further express our concern at the continued imposition of such measures which hinder the well-being of populations of the affected countries and create obstacles to the full realization of their full human rights. We reiterate that there is need to strengthen the United Nations as the primary multilateral organization, providing it with the substantive capacity to fully and effectively meet the purposes and principles enshrined in its charter, and at consolidating its democratic and intergovernmental character, in particular through the revitalization of the General Assembly and strengthening its authority as a democratic, inclusive, equitable, and representative body of the organization, as well as expediting reform of the United Nations Security Council in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 62/557 in a comprehensive and integrated manner in order to make the Security Council a more democratic, effective, transparent, and representative organ of the United Nations. Madam President, the NAM movement reaffirms and underscores its position and commitment with regard to multilateral cooperation for just, democratic world, for the promotion of the principle of pacific settlement of disputes in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, in accordance with international law and the United Nations resolutions, including those resolutions of this very Council. In that context, we emphasize the significant role played by International Court of Justice, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, in promoting and encouragement settlement of international disputes by peaceful means in accordance with the relevant provisions of this charter and the statute of the court. The movement remains committed to its founding principles and reaffirms its determination to work for the establishment of a peaceful, just, equitable world order with shared global affluence. Furthermore, NAM member states renewed their determination to work for a multipolar world through the reform and strengthening of the United Nations and multilateral processes, which contribute to a better world and a secure future for all. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency General Abu Bakr for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ratu William Maivalili Katonevier, President of the Republic of Fiji.
President of the United Nations Security Council, Excellencies, I congratulate the government of Slovenia for its leadership and for convening these important discussions today. In 1970, when Fiji joined the United Nations, we recognized the significance of multilateralism and that by virtue of our membership, Fiji has contributed immensely towards a peaceful and safer world. Testament to these are Fiji's extensive contribution to UN peacekeeping operations, which remains a cornerstone of our foreign policy since our first peacekeeping mission in 1978. Since then, till today, Fiji has contributed the highest number of UN peacekeepers per capita than any other country. Aligning with the theme of this year's International Day of Peace, Fiji calls for the inculcating of the culture of peace from the grassroots of society into religious communities and learning institutions and to our communities as a whole. We urge the United Nations to play a proactive role in this endeavor, not only responding to conflicts, but in building and reinforcing a culture of peace. The United Nations Security Council, which has a primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, has remained almost unchanged. However, the security landscape has vastly evolved with new and emerging threats and crises. The Council's effectiveness and representativeness are important. Fiji calls for a more inclusive Security Council that ensures a permanent seat for small island developing states. Madam President, the concept of peace resonates with us in the Blue Pacific in its relevance and urgency. In appreciation of the value of peacekeeping, effort towards establishment of a Pacific cooperation network in the field of peacekeeping, a joint effort with a light coordination mechanism in the United Nations Department of Peace Operations is underway. Regional policies, including the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific, the 2018 Bold Declaration on Regional Security, and other highlight Pacific leaders' vision on a region of peace. With the vision of being an ocean of peace, the region is undertaking efforts embedded in peace as a cornerstone of future policies and strategies. International collaboration can help refine and strengthen current efforts, ensuring that it serves not only the Pacific, but contributes to peace and security worldwide. In closing, while keeping with the theme of today's dialogue, Fiji reiterates the importance of the three pillars of the UN Charter and the return to the principles of the Charter to help us collectively navigate a complex peace and security landscape that guarantees a safe and sustainable future for all. Madam President, I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Katunive for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Filip Ivanovic, Deputy Prime Minister of Montenegro.
Dear Madam President, distinguished colleagues, allow me first to thank Slovenia for convening this open debate, as well as briefers for their insightful remarks. Montenegro aligns itself with the statement of the European Union and wishes to add the following in a national capacity. Today, in a time of highest number of escalating conflicts since the Cold War, international legal order and multilateralism are on the test. We continue to witness polarization among UN member states that highly impacts the work of the UN Security Council and alarming disrespect of international humanitarian law, including human rights, and consequently the erosion of trust in international institutions. We are seeing severe civilian harm from Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, DRC to Sahel that has caused unprecedented casualties and suffering, as well as the high risk of famine. Excellencies, dear colleagues, states cannot be above the law, the UN Charter, or legally binding UN Security Council resolutions. In this regard, Montenegro reiterates calls of other member states addressed to the Security Council's permanent members to refrain from using the veto for actions that could prevent or stop violence worldwide. This is precisely why states must work together to rebuild trust in the UN Security Council as the main organ to maintain the international peace and security. Nevertheless, Montenegro strongly believes that UN-centric, rule-based system is a precondition for long-lasting peace and development. Today's meeting, which we consider both timely and essential, is another opportunity to recommit to the UN Charter and multilateralism for ensuring more just, democratic and sustainable world order. The way forward is based only through mutual respect, trust and consensus. Montenegro values the work of the UN peace-building architecture on prevention of violence and conflicts and strongly supports the promotion of international cooperation and the respect of the UN Charter as a cornerstone of the rule of law at the international level. We welcome all peaceful resolutions, including negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitrary, etc. We also commend the UN Secretary General's new agenda for peace and look forward to deepening our discussions on the future of peacekeeping in the context of the next ministerial meeting to be held in Germany in 2025. In current geopolitical situation, contested and complex, it is vitally important to work together on the Security Council's credibility and relevance. Another crucial step is to increase trust within nations, to find common grounds and enhance international cooperation. We firmly support the Council's close cooperation with regional organizations in order to maintain peace and security. Dear colleagues, peace is our most precious value and we strive for it, the most valuable legacy for succeeding generations. To accomplish this common goal and fulfill the promise to the future generations, Member States must uphold the values and objectives of the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Ivanovich for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Fernandez, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Mexico.
Gracias, señora presidenta. El tema liderazgo para la paz es pertinente y necesario en esta semana de alto nivel. Qué mejor momento para analizar la forma en la que el Consejo de Seguridad encaja en el nuevo impulso al multilateralismo que acabamos de acordar en el Pacto del Futuro. En décadas pasadas, la comunidad internacional volteaba los ojos al Consejo de Seguridad cuando estallaba algún conflicto. Ahora, muchos acuerdos de paz o ceses al fuego se forjan en ámbitos lejanos a las Naciones Unidas. Los reacomodos geopolíticos e ideológicos dominan hoy el salón del Consejo de Seguridad. El uso frecuente del veto no ha hecho más que dañar la imagen de este órgano y la reputación de aquellos países que considerábamos líderes en algún momento. Es claro que en conflictos tan apremiantes como los de Ucrania, Gaza y Sudán, el Consejo de Seguridad se ha quedado muy atrás. Esta situación ha generado que actores independientes a las Naciones Unidas sean los que asuman cada vez más el liderazgo. Claramente, el mundo no puede quedarse con los brazos cruzados y ejemplo no nos faltan de países y organizaciones regionales que movilizan sus recursos para mediar acuerdos. Por ejemplo, Qatar y Egipto han sido instrumentales en promover un cese al fuego en Gaza. El secretario general de la ONU y Turquía lograron la histórica iniciativa de granos del Mar Negro. Como país convencido del multilateralismo y el papel preponderante de las Naciones Unidas, México propone 4 puntos para reforzar liderazgos efectivos. Primero, seamos eficientes y vayamos a la sustancia de las crisis. Dejemos atrás discursos retóricos y repetitivos en las sesiones de este Consejo. 2, hagamos mayor uso de las organizaciones regionales como la Unión Africana. 3, una vez más, apelemos a los miembros permanentes de este Consejo para que limiten el uso del veto y dejen de imponer consideraciones meramente nacionales por encima del bien colectivo. Y cuarto, reforcemos las facultades de la Asamblea General, a la cual también le competen la paz y la seguridad internacionales. Hacemos votos para que los resultados de la Cumbre del Futuro se traduzcan en verdaderos compromisos colectivos para revitalizar el papel de las Naciones Unidas. Transformemos esos ideales en acción y mostremos al mundo que el Consejo de Seguridad tiene liderazgo para la paz. Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hernández García for his statement. I now give the floor to His Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي رئيس مجلس الأمن، رئيس وزراء سلوفينيا، السيد روبرت، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، أود بداية أن أشكر سلوفينيا على الدعوة لعقد هذه الجلسة ونثني على موقفها الداعمة لجهود ترسيخ السلم والأمن الدوليين وتحديدا مشاركتها الإجماع الدولي واعترافها التاريخي بدولة فلسطين. يأتي اجتماعنا في فترة تتصاعد فيها وتيرة الصراعات والأزمات مع تضاؤل أفق حلها وتضاعف التحديات والتهديدات المشتركة مع تفاوت الأولويات حيالها، وتتنامى أزمة الثقة في النظام الدولي متعدد الأطراف وقدرته على تحقيق آمال الشعوب بمستقبل يسوده السلام والتنمية. تحتم علينا هذه الظروف تقييم حالة عمل الدولي متعدد الأطراف وأسباب تراجعه عن حل الأزمات ومعالجة التحديات المشتركة، ولعل النظر الجاد بالإسراع في عملية إصلاح مجلس الأمن أصبح ضرورة ملحة أكثر من أي وقت مضى. ونؤكد بأن استعادة الاحترام للمواثيق والأعراف الدولية يأتي بتطبيق القانون الدولي والقانون الدولي الإنساني ومحاسبة منتهكيه دون انتقائية. وبالنظر إلى الأزمات المستعصية والصراعات الأزلية، فإن التحدي لا ينحصر في عجز منظومة السلم والأمن والمؤسسات الدولية عن الاستجابة لها، بل يتعداه ليشمل غياب القيادة من أجل السلام، لأن صناعة السلام تتطلب الشجاعة في اتخاذ القرارات الصعبة. فخلف كل تعطيل لمسارات السلام والتسويات السياسية نجد بعض القيادات السياسية تغلب مصالحها الشخصية واعتباراتها الحزبية على المصالح الجامعة والسلم الإقليمي والدولي. والذي انعكس بشكل واضح على كفاءة المنظمات الدولية ومجلس الأمن على وجه الخصوص في أداء مهامها. ولعلنا نجد في غياب التحرك الدولي الجاد لإيقاف التصعيد العسكري والإسرائيلي المستمر خير دليل على ما يعانيه النظام الدولي متعدد الأطراف من قصور وتضعضع في الإرادة السياسية الدولية. تؤمن المملكة بأن السلام هو الأساس الذي يمهد للتعاون والتنمية، وهو الحامي لديمومتها، والخروج من دائرة العنف والأزمات يجب علينا تمكين القيادة الدولية المسؤولة وإحباط محاولات تصدير المصالح السياسية ضيقة على حساب أمن الشعوب وتعايشها. وستظل المملكة داعمة للنظام الدولي متعدد الأطراف وساعية لتطويره وتمكين مقاصده واستعادة الثقة بمؤسساته، وهي ملتزمة بتعزيز العمل الجماعي من أجل تحقيق الأمن والتنمية المشتركة. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank His Highness Prince Faisal for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Shehbaz Sharif, Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Pakistan congratulates Slovenia for convening the Security Council to discuss leadership for peace. Proliferating wars in the Middle East, Europe and elsewhere, great power tensions and growing poverty are threatening the foundations of the world order. Last Sunday, we approved the Pact for the Future. We must give life to our commitments, else the future will be bleak and dangerous. First, we must compel Israel to halt its genocidal war in Gaza and prevent its attempt to provoke a wider conflict in the Middle East. Bombing in Beirut is most condemnable. It is time to apply sanctions against Israel, including an arms and trade embargo. It is time to hold its leadership accountable for its crimes against the Palestinian people. The Security Council, Madam President, must develop an impartial plan for a ceasefire and peaceful solution for the war in Ukraine, and not allow its perpetuation or escalation. The Council can no longer ignore the festering Jammu and Kashmir dispute. It poses an ever-present ominous threat to international peace and security. The Council must call for a halt to the massive violations of the fundamental rights of the Kashmiri people and implement its own resolution that demand a plebiscite for self-determination in Kashmir Valley. The Council should effectively address the resurgence of the threat of terrorism from Afghanistan, especially from Daesh, ISIL-K, and the Fitna al-Khawarij. The Council must extend active support to the African countries and the African Union to defeat terrorism and foreign intervention. UN peacekeeping must become more robust and effective. The Council should initiate confidence-building measures to prevent a war between the major powers and ease the rising tension, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. Healthy competition between governments is very healthy and good, but must not take the shape of ugly confrontation. The Council must declare zero tolerance for the illegal use of force and revive global efforts to halt and reverse the new arms race in nuclear and conventional weapons. It must build controls over new weapons and technologies, including artificial intelligence, that are making war more likely and more lethal. Madam President, in cooperation with other member states, Pakistan shall pursue these objectives in the Security Council when it assumes its seat in the Council next year. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Sharif for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alar Karis, President of the Republic of Estonia.
Madam President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of Estonia and Lithuania. I address this esteemed gathering today with a heavy heart. The promise of peace, enshrined in the very foundation of this organization, remains distant for too many. Entire regions are devastated by conflict, climate crisis, deepening inequalities, and rising extremism, leaving millions displaced and communities shattered. Without the effective UN challenges, mount and chaos spreads. For decades, we have entrusted the Union nations to provide a layer of protection the world needs. Yet the realities expose the limitations of its current structures. This failure is painfully evident in Ukraine, where a permanent member of this Council is flagrantly and repeatedly violated international law, including the deliberately targeting civilians and critical infrastructure. Russia sits at this table while engaging in arms deals with Iran and North Korea that defy the Council's own resolutions and abuses its veto privilege to evade any accountability. The international community's response to Russia's aggression, as well as to all acts of terror and war, will define our collective future. It should be the concern of the international community if we allow the powerful to act with impunity. After this, who can feel safe and secure? Distinguished colleagues, we need a Security Council that is effective in addressing the key challenges of the 21st century, whether conflict and security, climate change, cybersecurity, or global inequality. There are steps we must take to fulfill the main responsibility and accountability of the Security Council to maintain international peace and security. Let us start by enforcing all provisions of the Charter, while the aggressor is voting on resolutions regarding the aggression they are part of. We must improve the working methods of the Security Council, and the veto power should be limited. We strongly back the French-Mexican initiative on veto restraint and the Code of Conduct by the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group. The veto initiative is good. We now need to discuss how we can take it further and strengthen the role of a General Assembly. Excellencies, we all just pledged at the Summit of the Future to work in solidarity to prepare for forever there is to come and to build a better future. Our vision for this is clear: a united nation where the principles of peace, sovereignty and human rights are not merely words, but guiding forces. Our task is to take this organization to where it must be, at the core of providing the international stability and security. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Karis for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gregor Közler, Vice Minister for European and International Affairs of Austria.
Thank you, Madam Chair, esteemed Mr. Minister Fajon, dear neighbor Slovenia, for convening this high-level open debate. I thank the Secretary General for his insightful statement and the briefers for their valuable contributions. Excellencies, maintaining peace and security is at the heart of the United Nations. It is why we all signed and ratified the UN Charter. We committed ourselves to upholding international law and resolving conflicts peacefully. Yet the world today tells a different story. Russia's unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine has been a cruel wake-up call, not only in Europe, and has brought unspeakable human suffering to Ukraine and its people. There are many other conflicts in the world, from the Middle East and the devastating humanitarian situation in Gaza, most recently also in Lebanon, to Sudan, Haiti, and Myanmar, to name only the most atrocious conflicts. At the same time, transnational challenges like climate change, hunger, and global health crises multiply these existing threats to peace and stability. Faced with these realities now more than ever, and in the spirit of the Summit of the Future, we need collective leadership, genuine collective leadership. Let me highlight 4 areas. First, we must restore trust in the multilateral system and thereby protect its relevance. We risk its irrelevance. For this, we need meaningful reform, starting with the Security Council itself. With this organ, Austria is honored to have been, together with Kuwait, co-chair in the person of our Perm Rep Axel Maschik of the intergovernmental negotiations on the Security Council reform. We are encouraged by the progress made, especially by the adoption of 3 ambitious actions on reform that the Summit of the Future held this week. The vision set out in the text is clear. Leaders have committed to ensuring greater representation for underrepresented and underrepresented regions, groups, and redress the historical injustice, especially against Africa. We all and they want to see a more effective council where the question of the veto will be key. We have committed ourselves to working towards a consolidated model, thereby moving the reform process to the next phase. Second, we need to ensure a swift and decisive response of the Security Council whenever humanitarian or international law as such is violated. Without such a response and accountability, impunity reigns and the cycle of violence perpetuates. We must establish and implement clear mechanisms to hold violators accountable. Third, we need a more networked system of global governance. Effective partnerships are essential in this context, whether among UN agencies or between regional organizations and the Security Council. And as a new member state, may I say, the cooperation between the European Union and its missions worldwide and the African Union and its missions with the UN is essential for such a networked partnership in this context. A collaborative, integrated approach is essential to strengthen our collective ability to prevent conflicts and sustain peace. Finally, we need more dialogue. Today's world is highly complex. There are no simple solutions, but dialogue is the linchpin of an effective multilateralism. It may not always lead to immediate resolution of conflicts, but it fosters mutual understanding and lays the groundwork for lasting peace. Very often we see that conflicts persist because parties lack the will to engage in genuine dialogue, in real dialogue, not just in phrases. But this lack of will comes at a tremendous cost. The lives of innocent humans, the degradation of our environment, and as such risking the future of our planet. As a small, militarily neutral country, but never politically neutral when it comes to violations of international law, Austria knows that an effective multilateral system is our only protective shield, our real only protective shield against a world where might makes right. This is why Austria is running for the Security Council for the term of 2027 and 28. But this is only part of our very broad multilateral DNA and understanding, because we are a seat country of the United Nations, with Vienna of one of the seats, and we are determined to continue to help create space for genuine dialogue, also in the most difficult situations, in the spirit of mutual trust and meaningful partnerships. Ladies and gentlemen, a space where leadership is defined by its commitment to peace, not by seeking power for its own sake. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kizler for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Nicol Pashinyan, Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia.
Thank you very much, distinguished attendees. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation to Slovenia for organizing this open debate. The global security crisis has undermined the multilateral system, we continue to witness a growing number of conflicts and crises with a heavy toll on the civilian population, including the most vulnerable. The United Nations must be resilient to the attempts to create a situation when the use of force in interstate relations, acts of aggression, and gross violations of human rights and international humanitarian law are considered normal. As the theme of today's discussion is leadership for peace, I want to share my belief that indeed peace requires leadership and sincere political courage. I and my government are dedicated to closing the chapter of conflict in our region and transforming the dynamics into cooperation for prosperity, stability, and peace. Armenia stands ready to sign the peace agreement with Azerbaijan. The Armenian side has proposed to sign already agreed articles of the peace treaty before the COP29 in Baku, thus creating a conducive environment to move forward the peace process. The Crossroads of Peace initiative of Armenia aims at unlocking the economic potential of the region and strengthening economic and cultural ties, thus contributing to the political dialogue and achievement of a comprehensive peace for the benefit of all peoples. We stand ready to use the positive momentum and continue the border delimitation process on the basis of the agreement between our border delimitation commissions based on the Almaty Declaration of 1991. A strong and unequivocal support by the United Nations to the efforts of Armenia to achieve just and durable peace in the region is crucial. Thank you for your attention.
His Excellency Mr. Pashinyan for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ivan Kondo, Caretaker Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bulgaria.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen. Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement to be delivered on behalf of the EU, and I would like to highlight some additional points. At the outset, let me express our appreciation to Slovenia for convening this momentous high-level open debate. I would also like to thank the briefers for their insightful presentations and assessments of the trends on the ground. This debate is held at a critical moment. Building upon our commitment to strengthen multilateralism, we have adopted at the beginning of this week the Pact on the Future. The upcoming Peace-Building Architecture Review in 2025 will provide us with another opportunity to further improve the global security framework. As many of the previous speakers today have already outlined, we are observing a worrying trend with the number of conflicts around the world increasing and the respect for the norms and the principles of the UN Charter declining. The most effective way to address this trend is by building trust and strengthening leadership, defending the values of democracy and human rights, and implementing Security Council resolutions and decisions of the international courts. It has been 2.5 years since a permanent member of the Security Council unleashed a war of aggression against its neighboring country, violating the principles of the UN Charter and the international law. It is indispensable that Russia withdraws from Ukraine and stops the war so that mutual trust and confidence in international rules-based order can be restored. In the face of ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and Sudan, the UN Security Council must restore its credibility as the global body responsible for peace and security. These conflicts, while different in nature, demand a consistent response from the international community, namely swift actions and genuine commitment to achieving lasting peace. The effectiveness and accountability of the United Nations Security Council should be strengthened by enhancing the transparency and accountability of its work. With this in mind, Bulgaria took its decision to be among the initial co-sponsors of the United Nations General Assembly resolution known as the Veto Initiative. Next, I would like to further emphasize the crucial role of the elected members of the Security Council for strengthening multilateralism and increasing its effectiveness. They are uniquely positioned to foster unity, serve as a bridge builders and make the multilateralism deliver for all. In conclusion, I would like to reaffirm Bulgaria's commitment to the norms and principles of the international law, including human rights and international humanitarian law, and commitment of my country to multilateralism as the best investment in strengthening and upholding national sovereignty. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Konda for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Retno Lestari Priyanasari Marsudi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia.
Madam President, we are here to speak about the leadership for peace. But peace is nowhere to be found for the people of Palestine. When 41,000 Palestinians are killed, millions displaced, and all access for humanitarian operation closed, the very essence of our common humanity is questioned. They are symptoms of failed leadership for peace. There won't be peace also if there is no respect to sovereignty and territorial integrity. All eyes on the Council to revive this longest-standing conflict once and for all. Today, an all-out war is at risk in Lebanon. At the same time, we have the UNIFIL peacekeepers. If we cannot enforce UNSC mandate's tool to maintain peace, what remains of Council leadership for peace? Therefore, restoring credibility and trust to the Council is our priority. Council reform is paramount to ensure leadership for peace. I would like to underline two key points. First, strive for a more democratic leadership for peace. There is no greater urgency now than to establish immediate peace in Gaza. We must not let conflict escalation in the region, such as what is happening in Lebanon, reach a point of no return. Cold War mindset must be avoided as realities have changed. Indonesia calls for a more democratic mechanism for effective decision-making to avoid inaction in the face of grave threat to international peace and security. Second, ensure inclusivity and synergy on decision-making for peace. This Council must allow for more voices and wider action to be accommodated for peace. Strengthened and inclusive cooperation must be forged between the Council, UN bodies, and regional organizations. A better proportion of underrepresented regions and developing countries is also needed to ensure that all hands are on deck when world peace is at stake. Without inclusivity, peace will never be attained in entirety. Madam President, we do not need to search far and wide to pursue a secure future. We can start right here and right now with peace for the people of Palestine. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Mrs. Marsudi for her statement. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Tauhid Hussain, Advisor for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Interim Government of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam President, Excellencies and distinguished briefers. I thank the Slovenian Presidency for organizing this timely debate. The debate holds particular significance for Bangladesh. In recent months, our people witnessed an upheaval. Led by students, people at large demonstrated remarkable courage and conviction against tyrannical governance. We are now on course for transformation. This transition resonates deeply with today's discussion on the need for a renewed leadership for peace. Let me reflect on the guiding questions for today's debate. First, to address the alarming erosion of respect for the UN Charter, we must rekindle the values enshrined in it. It is not a matter of choice. The global system of collective security is increasingly under strain due to blatant disregard for international norms. The Council must reinforce accountability, address inequality, and ensure that violations of international law are met with firm responses without exception. The Security Council needs to be reformed to make it more representative and effective in addressing both the conventional and emerging security threats. Secondly, UN Security Council needs to do better in restoring credibility and relevance in protracted conflicts such as Myanmar, Gaza, or Ukraine. The situation in Myanmar and more recently in Gaza and Lebanon are instances of Council's failure to fulfill its foremost duty to protect the civilians and address the root cause of armed conflict. As the Council is aware, Bangladesh has been hosting over 1.2 million Rohingyas who fled their homes in the face of gruesome atrocities. Over past 1 month, another 20,000 plus Rohingyas entered our territory as the conflict in the Rakhine state of Myanmar intensified. Unfortunately, our capacity is simply overstretched. This Council can no longer remain indifferent to the question and let the civilians suffer most agonizingly. We must prioritize political solutions in Myanmar and promote an inclusive and sustainable peace process. The Council has to remain seized on the situation in Myanmar through periodic briefings. Regional actors need to be engaged too in addressing the root causes of conflict in Myanmar, be political or socio-economic. Third, the elected members should shoulder responsibility to build consensus on critical issues before the Council. They have to bridge divides and act as honest brokers, ensuring that the voices of smaller nations and developing countries are not lost in the complex geopolitical calculus. When the elected members lead by example, by promoting dialogue, transparency, and compromise, the Council gets to effective action on the ground. Fourth, engaging the regional organizations. Regional organizations are increasingly crucial partners in maintaining international peace and security. Fostering regional cooperation is essential in reinforcing the Council's efforts. The Council needs to further empower regional entities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America so that their initiatives receive adequate support in terms of political backing and resources. Cooperation with organizations like ASEAN, ECOWAS, African Union, for example, need to be deepened to address regional discords effectively and prevent their escalation. In conclusion, Madam President, Bangladesh, led by Nobel Peace Laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus, remains committed to contributing to the UN's collective endeavors for peace, including through our robust participation in UN peacekeeping and peace building. Let us work together to ensure that multilateralism delivers to today's challenges. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hussein for his statement. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Casper Veldkamp, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Madam President. In the past year, global security has eroded and peace seems further away than ever in the Middle East, Sudan, Ukraine, and many other regions. These conflicts and wars underscore the need for action, including protecting, strengthening, reforming the UN, including the Security Council. Let me begin with our commitment to uphold the UN Charter. Ignoring violations of the Charter undermines the foundations of our collective peace and security. And in this context, we condemn Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. The Netherlands supports Ukraine politically, militarily, financially, and morally. And yes, it is in accordance with international law for Ukraine to defend itself against the aggressor, also on the territory of the aggressor. Madam President, this morning, Germany, Canada, Australia, and the Netherlands announced to hold Afghanistan accountable for violating the rights of women and girls. Repression of women's rights by the Taliban is a shame. Madam President, we are pursuing mechanisms to hold ISIS accountable for atrocities against Yazidi and other communities, and working with partners to take the initiative to establish an international tribunal to this end. Madam President, we must strengthen our collective efforts to alleviate suffering and restore peace. In Sudan, for example, where almost 25 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. We have pledged 80 million euros to help alleviate the immense human suffering there. We support the extension of the fact-finding mission. But what's needed most is for the fighting to stop, negotiations to resume, and obstacles to humanitarian assistance to be removed. The Netherlands stands ready to strengthen the UN's role in its global peace efforts and to use our upcoming membership of the Peace Building Commission to ensure we put people at the center of all efforts, because lasting peace is built with people, not just for them. Madam President, nearly a year has passed since the shocking violence of October 7th, and the prospects are bleak for the hostages still in captivity and for the people of Gaza, whose suffering worsens every day. We must do everything in our power to achieve a sustainable peace. We fully support those among you who are doing the heavy lifting to reach a ceasefire
and will continue to work with you towards this end. We're also fully supporting efforts to lower the flames between Hezbollah, a illicit terror organization, and the State of Israel, because the risk of further escalation and more civilian casualties remains high. Madam President, by protecting, strengthening, and reforming the UN, we can pave the way to a more secure future. Please be assured that the Netherlands will stay engaged on these matters and stays ready to cooperate. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Veldkamp for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kazem Garib Abadi, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, International and Legal Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam President, thank you for organizing this timely initiative and a topic of such significance, leadership for peace. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, our world stands at critical juncture. We are facing the most conflicts since the Cold War, marked by a staggering increase in civilian casualties, especially among women, children, and humanitarian workers, and an unprecedented crisis of forced disappearance. The United Nations, the most prominent symbol of the multilateral system, which was established to prevent and manage conflicts, is under immense strain, and the bedrock of international relations, international law, and the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter are being flouted with alarming consistency. Impunity for egregious violations of international law, in particular international humanitarian law, threatens to become the norm, and this permissiveness risks undermining not just future peace efforts, but the very foundations of multilateralism. We see examples of conflict across the world today, from Gaza to Sudan to Lebanon. Each of these situations, while different, present an opportunity for the Security Council to demonstrate renewed leadership. In each, we must ask, how can we do better? How can we restore the Council's credibility and relevance in the eyes of the international community? Madam President, the United Nations Security Council is primarily responsible for maintaining international peace and security. But too often, this very body has become paralyzed by political divisions, preventing decisive action. The Security Council, regrettably, has become a tool in the hands of certain permanent members who prioritize their political and strategic interests over global peace. They manipulate the Council to pressure independent, sovereign nations while paralyzing it from acting decisively against the aggression and violations committed by their allies. The United States' repeated use of its veto power to shield Israel from accountability for its ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and now Lebanon is a glaring example of this abuse. The situation in Gaza is our collective failure to uphold international peace and security. We are witnessing an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Gaza has, as a senior United Nations official aptly described, become the hell of the earth. The reports are horrifying. Over 42,000 innocent Palestinian civilians, including women and children, were slaughtered by the occupying regime, with more than 93,000 wounded. In Lebanon, the deliberate targeting of civilians in densely populated areas using advanced technology for terror purposes is a blatant violation of international law, humanitarian principles, and multiple United Nations resolutions. This savage assault is not just an attack on the Lebanese people, it is an attack on humanity itself. Israel has crossed every red line. For this terrorist regime, international humanitarian law and the principle of human dignity mean nothing. Israel's leadership has no intention of pursuing peace. Its true objective is to drag the entire region into full-scale war. The Security Council's silence is deafening. It sends a dangerous message to the innocent victims of this war and the international community. The Security Council must fulfill its responsibilities under the Charter. Immediate action must be taken to halt Israel's war machine and prevent further regional escalation. the Council must act to protect civilians in Palestine and Lebanon and enforce Israel's compliance with international law and its binding resolutions. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, leadership for peace requires unity, integrity, and unwavering adherence to the United Nations Charter and international law. We cannot pick and choose which laws to uphold and when. We must demonstrate leadership by acting consistently, impartially, and with integrity. If we are to restore peace, we must first restore trust. This begins with a deep respect for international law and the United Nations Charter. Only through consistent, impartial action can we steer the world toward a more secure and peaceful future. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abadi for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Michael Martin, Tanesta and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence of Ireland.
Thank you, President, for convening us today. We meet at a dangerous moment, and I'm deeply concerned about spiralling violence in the Middle East. The scale of death, destruction, and unimaginable human suffering in Gaza is truly horrific and completely unacceptable. Israel's response to the horrific Hamas attack has been completely disproportionate. The violence must stop now. We urgently need a ceasefire and hostage release deal, followed by a massive surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This must and should be the priority. Instead, we are seeing the extension of conflict in the West Bank and now into Lebanon. This reckless escalation is deeply alarming. I'm appalled at surging settler violence in the West Bank and the ongoing efforts to undermine the Palestinian Authority. This must stop. I condemn Hezbollah for its attacks on Israel and its malign role in Lebanon and the region. But massive and indiscriminate airstrikes on densely populated areas in Lebanon are resulting in a shocking loss of life and a killing of innocent men, women, and children. In my view, this violates international humanitarian law. These attacks are on a sovereign state and a United Nations member. Israel has an obligation to abide by international humanitarian law. I call on it to do so. And I call on all parties to exercise restraint. Over many years, UNIFIL has played an invaluable role in Lebanon. There are contingents from many countries here today, including 350 Irish troops. I pay tribute to all UN peacekeepers facing such a dangerous situation. A regional war would be disastrous, including for Israel. We must step back from the brink before it is too late. The only viable path to a lasting peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians is a two-state solution. While I am under no illusions as to the challenges ahead, last week's adoption by the General Assembly of a resolution on the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice is a step in the right direction. President, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine is a threat to European and global security. A permanent member of this Council is seeking to change borders by force. It is weaponizing food, energy, and migration. It is defying the UN Charter, undermining the multilateral system, and this very Council itself. There cannot be impunity for such wholesale breaches of international law. Ireland stands in full solidarity with Ukraine. We will work for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on the principles of the UN Charter, including respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states and Ukraine's peace formula. President, the situation in Sudan is appalling. 12 million people forced from their homes. Widespread reports of horrendous abuses against civilians, particularly women and girls. The scourge of hunger and famine. We need to speak with one voice to demand a ceasefire, humanitarian access, protection of civilians, and accountability for human rights abuses. We also need to see external actors behave responsibly and cease their involvement and support for the conflict. To do whatever it takes to pressure the parties to come back to the negotiating table and bring to an end this destructive cycle of violence. In conclusion, President, in these and so many other conflicts, we see the obligations of international law cast aside. We see various serious violations of international law go unanswered and international crimes go unpunished. We see a lack of accountability leading to a culture of impunity, and we see resolutions of this Council left unenforced. We have spoken a lot about the future this week and adopted the Pact for the Future. What we need now is political will, for leaders to speak out, to protect multilateralism and the United Nations Charter. If we fail to do so, we condemn this generation and the next to a very uncertain and dangerous future. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Martin for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Singapore.
Thank you, Madam President, and members of the Security Council. The world is in an acutely dangerous phase, and civilians in multiple trouble spots are paying a terrible price. And so, the United Nations is at an inflection point. We need to reform the multilateral and UN institutions to address both current and future challenges, including reform of this very Security Council. First, we must constrain the exercise of the veto. All permanent members should focus on the broader goal of delivering international peace and security. However, the trend of the increasing exercise of the vetoes suggests that we cannot leave this to the P5 to voluntarily change their behavior. The wider UN membership must reach agreement on how the veto is exercised in the future, and Singapore stands ready to discuss this further at the General Assembly. The approach is not to encroach on the Council's mandate, but to guard against actions that prevent this Council from fulfilling its mandate. Second, the Council must do more to prevent conflicts. The Council should work more closely and effectively with the other main organs of the UN to facilitate both early warning and response. Article 99 of the UN Charter is in fact a powerful preventive diplomacy tool. I'm glad that the Pact for the Future alluded to this. However, this Council needs to react more quickly with a concrete response when the Secretary-General invokes Article 99, particularly for humanitarian catastrophes and mass atrocities. Third, we need to strengthen the role of elected members of this Council. We have seen how the E10 bridges gaps when the P5 were instead mired in mutual distrust and paralysis. Given the powerful bridging role of the E10, elected members should have a greater say in pen holdership and decision-making, and be allowed to lead or co-lead on key issues, particularly concerning their respective regions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank His Excellency Dr. Balakrishnan for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Hassan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam President. Yesterday evening, the streets of Midtown were filled with the voices of grieving. They were grieving the killing of over 500 people in Lebanon, a heinous mass murder which is made all the more shameful by the fact that it happened as world leaders gathered under the banner of United Nations. They also mourn the fact that it has almost been 1 year of the non-stop slaughter of the people of Gaza by the brutal Israel regime. Various instruments of international law prescribe the rules governing our conduct. Why then have we failed? Leadership for peace, united in respect of the United Nations Charter. This is the theme of our gathering today, but in the eyes of the world's population, it sounds like a punchline. For over 300 days now, Madam President, the Security Council seems to have forgotten the existence of the United Nations Charter. Had this council fulfilled its charter-mandated role as the custodian of the global peace and security, we would have neither allowed nor witnessed the murder of more than 41,000 innocent people, many of them children, by Israel and Gaza over the past 11 months. Everywhere, Madam President, the same question echoed. Is the UN too broken to be fixed? The answer is certainly no, as there is indeed a way, and only one way, to fix the United Nations. The veto must be limited. This is what happened. This is what needs to happen, not just to save the people of Gaza, but to save the United Nations. The world is watching as the Security Council struggles to free itself from a deadlock in which one voice can overrule the majority, disregard the clearly stated principles of United Nations Charter, and supported the continued violation of international law. Make no mistake, Madam President, this is becoming an existential crisis for the United Nations and a test of its relevance and fitness for purpose. Last week, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 10/24 by an overwhelming majority. This is a success that we hope will not be tampered with by the power of veto in the Security Council. We, Malaysia, demand that this Council support the full implementation of the resolution. Remember that the world is watching, Madam President. Do not risk disillusioning us. Do not risk disillusioning us. It is the member states that give the United Nations its credibility and not the other way around. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Hassan for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mauro Luís Sequeira Vieira, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil.
Madam President, Brazil commends Slovenia for organizing this high-level open debate and thanks the Secretary General and the briefers for their insights. The world looks at the UN Security Council for leadership, yet what they see is a body struggling to uphold its own mandate, hamstrung by geopolitical divides and double standards. As we speak, Lebanon stands on the edge of a conflict, potentially dragging the region along. The people of Lebanon are suffering not only from political instability and economic collapse, but from the paralysis of this council. The illegal and indiscriminate attacks on the Lebanese people and their sovereignty, along with the subsequent exchange of violence, have resulted in casualties of over 100,000 displaced in southern Lebanon. The consequences for Israel are also severe, with at least 60,000 people forced to flee their homes in the north. The Security Council's lack of decisive action to prevent another humanitarian catastrophe raises concerns about its effectiveness and underscores its poor records in exerting leadership on peace and security. The plight of Palestine is a case in point. We have been witnessing the routine breaches of international humanitarian law in Gaza, where countless reports show that civilian areas are being indiscriminately and disproportionately struck in military operations. Critical infrastructure has been destroyed, worsening the suffering of innocent civilians and spreading famine and disease. Moreover, humanitarian personnel, doctors and health workers protected under the Geneva Conventions have been killed. Journalists have been shot or detained, and news outlets have been shut down. Yet, Time after time, resolutions are blocked and the veto is wielded like a weapon of impunity. This is not leadership. This is abdication of responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot have double standards for peace. Every civilian affected by conflict deserves the same level of protection and advocacy. The lives of all individuals in conflict zones are equally valuable, and our actions should reflect this fundamental truth by ensuring that the rights and safety of all civilians are protected with the same vigor and resolve. The value of every life, Ukrainian, Yemeni, Lebanese, Palestinian, or Sudanese, must be upheld as universally inviolable. The principles of international justice and human dignity must transcend geopolitical boundaries. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to rethink the entire UN system. Among other improvements, we need a council that serves all humanity, not the interests of a few. Let's be bold and ambitious, as President Lula emphasized during his participation in the activities of the General Assembly this year. The future of global peace depends on our ability to lead effectively and in doing so, to deliver justice for all. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Vieira for his statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Theodora Gentzis, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belgium.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs. La Belgique reste profondément convaincue qu'un multilatéralisme efficace, fondé sur des règles et traduit dans des actes, est notre seule option pour trouver des solutions communes, justes et durables en faveur de la paix et la sécurité. C'est la promesse contenue dans la Charte des Nations Unies, un engagement qui repose sur le respect des principes et des règles qui s'imposent à tout le monde et qui ne sont pas à géométrie variable. Mesdames et Messieurs, il n'y a jamais d'autre horizon possible que le règlement pacifique des conflits. Depuis plus de 2 ans, la Belgique demande la paix pour l'Ukraine, une paix qui doit être juste et durable. L'annexion de pans entiers de territoires ukrainiens ne peut être un prérequis au dialogue. La Belgique plaide également pour la relance d'un processus politique négocié à Gaza afin de mettre en place une solution à 2 États, seule perspective pour conjuguer les aspirations légitimes du peuple palestinien à l'autodétermination avec les garanties sécuritaires attendues par Israël. La Belgique apporte tout son soutien au processus diplomatique qui tente de restaurer le dialogue et la paix, qu'il s'agisse des efforts de médiation en cours au Moyen-Orient ou ceux à l'œuvre pour mettre un terme aux conflits meurtriers qui ravagent le Soudan ou l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo. Mesdames et Messieurs, je parlais des principes et des règles qui s'imposent à nous. Les règles du droit international humanitaire sont simples, universelles. Elles s'imposent dans leur totalité, à toutes les parties et dans tous les conflits, pour protéger la dignité des civils et réduire les souffrances qui leur sont infligées. Les attaques indiscriminées qui blessent ou tuent les civils, y compris les travailleurs humanitaires et le personnel médical, détruisent les hôpitaux, les écoles et les infrastructures indispensables au maintien d'une vie digne, sont inacceptables. Elles sont inacceptables partout. Il doit y avoir un prix à payer pour les violences infligées aux populations dont les conséquences se font sentir sur des générations. Il faut donner aux survivants les moyens de garder espoir dans la force du droit afin de rompre avec le cycle de la violence et parvenir à une paix durable. C'est ce que signifie la lutte contre l'impunité. Mesdames et Messieurs, en toutes circonstances, ces principes et ces règles doivent rester notre boussole afin de préserver la confiance que nous plaçons les uns dans les autres. Une confiance qui rend possible la coopération internationale. Ce Conseil se doit d'en être le garant. Il doit faire usage de l'entièreté de sa boîte à outils pour assurer la mise en œuvre de ces résolutions. La Belgique lui accorde son plein soutien pour ce faire, ainsi qu'à toute action concrète des membres élus, dont je salue ici l'engagement allant dans ce sens. Je vous remercie.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Gentzis for her statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting, and I intend, with the concurrence of the members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until tomorrow, 6 p.m. The meeting is suspended.
Our position regarding Lebanon has always been very clear. We would prefer a diplomatic solution. We are entirely focused on achieving our objectives, which in the north is the return of our displaced citizens who have become refugees in their own country, back to their homes, back to their schools, back to their families. The suffering is always on our mind. We're talking about elderlies, kids, entire families. If we can return them back home, it means that we are not responsible for their well-being. That's why the government decided to add this objective to the goals of the war. Do not mistake a peaceful nation for a defenseless one. We have the means, we have the capabilities to achieve this goal. If diplomacy fails to return our residents to their homes, then we will use all means at our disposal in accordance with international law to achieve our aims. Thank you very much.
Michelle Nichols from Reuters. Have the Americans and the French convinced Israel to cease hostilities with Lebanon?
So we are grateful for all those who are making a sincere effort with diplomacy to avoid escalation, to avoid a full war. We are open to ideas, but you know, we are very honest about it. Our goal is to push Hezbollah from the fence, allow the residents to come back to the communities, and I hope we will be able to achieve it without using our military capabilities.
Ambassador, it's Pamela Falk from U.S. News and World Report. The question about negotiations. The U.S. sources are saying there are talks going on to have a ceasefire. Do you see any progress in those?
So, you know, in our region, you know, you can have a lot of talks, but you actually have results when it happens. So as I said earlier, we welcome the initiatives from different negotiators, and I think they know exactly what we expect. And if we can achieve it with diplomacy, it will be much better for Israel, much better for Lebanon. I'm not sure Hezbollah care much about the people in Lebanon or the Iranians, which I have seen the applause they received in the General Assembly. I'm not sure they will be happy about that, but for the sake of the Lebanese people and the Israelis, a diplomatic solution is much better for all.
Mr. Ambassador, Tom Bateman from the BBC. Lebanon had its deadliest day since the end of its civil war. On Monday, 500 people killed, including 50 children, according to the Lebanese. Meanwhile, the US is calling for restraint. President Biden says he wants de-escalation. Are you not listening to the Americans?
Well, I don't know where you got those numbers. I don't know how many terrorists are included in those numbers. We are targeting terrorists who are sending rockets to our communities. You know, a few hours ago, a rocket flew to Tel Aviv that was intercepted, and we will continue to target terrorists. But all of this can stop immediately. Once Hezbollah will stop firing missiles and rockets into our civilian communities, there will be no cycle of violence in the region.
Mr. Ambassador.
The linkage that Iran decided to do between Hezbollah and Hamas, holding the people of Lebanon hostage, that's something which I'm not familiar with. How can you do that? How can you put out, excuse me, let me answer your question. No, I'm answering your question. I'm not here to listen to your opinion. I'm not here to listen to your opinion. You ask a question, you get an answer. The linkage that the Iranian regime did between Hezbollah and Hamas, holding the Lebanese people hostage, that's not done. You don't start a war with Israel just because you want to show sympathy for the atrocities of Hamas. And you don't, thank you.
The Prime Minister of Lebanon.
Yes. One by one. We have 2 more minutes.
One time you have decisive targets, you target leaders of Hezbollah, and another time you kill indiscriminately innocent people, like over 500 civilians died in Lebanon. Why this contradiction?
There is no contradiction. As we all know, Hezbollah placed the launchers of rockets in civilian properties, in houses, schools, hospitals. Once we know about the whereabouts of missiles and rockets, we target them. And excuse me, I know you are very excited, but you ask questions to receive answers. So I'm answering your answer. If someone knows that he has in his basement or is in rooftop a rocket launcher, he should move out. Because we know also about the whereabouts of the Hezbollah launchers in southern Lebanon. So if they are worried about it, they should move out. But I think the end for the cycle of violence is for Hezbollah to stop its aggression. One more question.
Mr. Ambassador, the Prime Minister of Lebanon has told us that he would like a ceasefire.
Oh, it's very clear. Regarding northern Lebanon, I want to bring you back to Resolution 1701 that was adopted here in this Council in 2006. We support Resolution 1701. That's what I will tell my colleagues today. We don't have to invent the wheel. You have the resolution in front of you. It is about time to implement it. And it's very clear. It calls for the presence of the Lebanese military in the border with Israel and not the Hezbollah militias and terror group on the border with Israel. We'll take last question, please.
The Prime Minister of Lebanon of Lebanon has told us that he would like a ceasefire. Would Israel welcome that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would add to that.